Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Fulbrighter podcast. Fulbrighter is an exclusive networking platform for Fulbright alumni and grantees. The platform lets you keep up to date with news from the global community of Fulbrighters and connect with fellow alumni and grantees from around the world. If you are a current grantee or an alumni from an official Fulbright program, head to fulbrighternetwork.com to create your account. My name is Gabriela Jimenez, and I'm a journalist and the community manager for the Fulbrighter platform. Today, I will have a conversation with Brian McCarty. Brian is a photographer, art director, and producer, and has been to China and Hong Kong as a Fulbright Specialist in 2017. He has 20 years of experience working in the toy industry and is a board member for the International Toy Research Association, as well as the executive director of War Toys, a nonprofit arts and media organization with a toy division. Founded in 2019, the organization collaborates with war-affected children in the field to produce artwork and other materials that are used in exhibitions, educational programs, media outreach, and advocacy campaigns. On top of that, it works with the largest manufacturers of inexpensive generic toys to foster small but impactful changes to enduringly popular toys, like plastic soldiers and baby dolls, so that millions of children have access to toys that better support their development and society as a whole. Hi, Brian. It is a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great. So, before we dive into the really interesting work you've been doing, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about your history with Fulbright. When did you first learn about the program and how did you make a decision to apply for it?
I think I first learned about the program in 2015. A fellow artist friend in Los Angeles had done a program in Poland and mentioned the Fulbright Specialist as the thing that got him there. And I went, oh, well, what is this? Did a little digging and understood the opportunity that it presented. And so started pursuing an application and got a lot of support in that. I'm very fortunate.
That's great. So I usually hear that from other guests on the podcast that there's always one Fulbrighter that kind of tells another person about the opportunity. So I really love that because it kind of shows, how the community it's trying to, bring more talents into the program, which is always great. I understand, Brian, you've been very successful as an art photographer. And your work has been exhibited by museums internationally, also featured by several prominent publications around the world. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you got into photography? And also maybe tell our listeners about the very specific kind of photographic work that you chose to focus on?
Sure. So I am a toy photographer and always have been. I started getting interested in photography at like age 12. And so it was a really natural thing just to use my toys as subjects for my early fumbling experiments with photography. And, blurry photos of action figures slowly over many years changed into sort of narrative tableaus shot on tabletop sets. I skipped a year of high school, went off to art school in New York, and was recruited into Benetton's Creative Research Center, Fabrica, back in 96. And it was there that War Toys actually started. Um, I was invited to do an exhibition in Croatia immediately after the War of Independence had ended. And given the post-war setting, I thought about conversations with my father about Vietnam. He served and would never share any stories about it. And I found letters he'd written to my mother home. And in the letters, he talked about like the first time he was shot at or the Tet Offensive or other things that happened to him on a very personal level. And I thought it was an opportunity to sort of understand him and his experiences better by reenacting these moments with a 1960s kind of vintage GI Joe. And I was 21 years old. This wasn't the most brilliantly executed thing I ever had done, but this idea of using off-the-shelf war toys has a way to sort of bridge these stories, to help communication, to help generations understand each other, to help people who haven't been experienced to war have some semblance of what happens. It grew over many years. And in 2011, I decided to restart this series with more intention and started in East Jerusalem, working with the Spafford Children's Center. Um, and it's continued ever since. So I will go to these places and will most often bring an art therapist with me or have an art therapist locally. And we'll conduct interviews with groups of children, usually in refugee camps or other settings like that. And what the children draw in these sessions becomes the basis for my photographs of locally sourced toys, narratively placed and posed at the actual location whenever possible to recreate the child's story. And the resulting photographs are, it sort of merges both the child's story, the location, and the toy artifacts, the toys that are available to the children in these places. And in all of that is where my Fulbright project developed, which I blather on about if you want, but I'll take a pause.
Let's maybe break it by, by questions here, because I definitely want to know more about, the Fulbright project and also understand a little bit more about war toys. But I want to make sure that listeners get also a glimpse at, how you got there. So, you told me that you kind of the idea for more toys came to from conversations with your dad and things like that, but you've also been successful in the toy industry before, right? So I was also interested in how did you end up into this field? How did you start working with toys? Because you were a photographer first and then did you get into toys, or was it something that happened like simultaneously?
Pretty much simultaneously. By the time I got to art school in Parsons, I was already well into toys. That's kind of my main deal. And like all students do, I dabbled in other stuff and documentary photography and fashion and whatever. And I think finally my sophomore year, I just said, you know what, that's what I want to do. And just stubbornly committed myself to building a career photographing toys. And that's kind of been it. But it's all been done just by like, nope, this is what I'm going to do. And only taking opportunities or seeking opportunities to do that. I was fortunate that after Benetton, I came back to the US and got a job with Mattel and was in house with them for about 4 years, mostly doing Hot Wheels. Uh, but in that time, too, I became aware of this growing movement of artists from around the world who decided to work with toys. And so I kind of was, feeling a little done with the corporate world and Mattel and that sort of thing. And so I left and found these folks doing these things, and just connected with them and started building a studio and a portfolio. And from all of that, brought in more clients like Disney and Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, and had a, a really good run of commercial work for several years, and was so fortunate and enjoyed it. But all of that work funded more toys. It funded the restarting that series.
I understand. So you've said as well previously that, toys shape and reflect our culture. So I was wondering, when did you first realize that? Was it, working in the toy industry, or like when did you come to that realization? And was that thought an insight into creating your nonprofit as well? Was that also something that once you realized that you were like, okay, I have to do something about this because it's really shaping the culture and reflecting the culture. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
I think because I come at toys as a geek, as someone who just loves toys. I'm an artist, and so also don't really have to concern myself too much with, making money necessarily, or that's not my main motivation. And so I saw at Mattel and within the industry folks who, are focused on the business as they have to be. And so in that, I think a lot gets lost. And I saw an opportunity for an organization like War Toys to fill in the gaps, to be able to do things not concerned about money, but instead about social impact or really using toys in their pure form. And so that's been very liberating and very exciting. But it all is from a reaction of the toy industry, of being inside of it and seeing that you've got this sort of art and commerce fighting each other a little bit. And so we're just trying to take the commerce out of it a little bit, and see what kind of things we can do if we just don't have to care about money for some things. And so that's where we're at.
I know that you've also mentioned before that you founded War Toys to grow peace by confronting war, not just its symptoms. And I thought that was, quite an interesting definition. So, can you expand a little bit more on that, and then get into what War Toys actually does? I know that you've mentioned before, but can you give us a little bit more insight into what the organization actually does, and what you mean when you say that you're trying to grow peace by confronting war, but not just its symptoms?
So the name War Toys may not be so apparent to folks outside the US. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was an organization called No War Toys. And they were quite popular here and mounted campaigns against, overt military toys, plastic guns and tanks and soldiers and that sort of thing. And they were very successful in getting Mattel and Hasbro and those types of companies just sort of pull back from that type of thing. It was this idea of you don't want to give your kid an arsenal and turn them into a soldier. And it makes total sense in some ways. What the campaign inadvertently did was just push all of that underground, meaning there's still so much warplay. There's Fortnite, there's all these other things where kids get to battle each other, but there's no connection to reality anymore. So you've lost any chance of educational opportunities. You've lost the opportunity to talk about resolving conflicts. It's just they get the dopamine and they get the fight, and that's super fun. And so we're saying, you know what, you can do that, and that's okay. But let's bring back more of the education. Let's bring back more of the reality in a very age appropriate, very safe way that lets parents and educators talk about war, talk about what happens in war, talk about resolving conflicts. So it isn't just blowing things up. And it's not just those other people over there. Of course, there's wars in those places. It just demystifies the whole thing. It's a tough sell right now in the world as it is, and especially here in the US, where people are so against talking about it. It is so taboo. Yet, again, within popular culture, within games, within toys, there is so much play fighting. So let's just acknowledge it. Let's own it and steer that play.
So I understand that the name that you've chosen has been perhaps criticized. It's considered a bit shocking. And it's kind of also perhaps implying something that's not exactly the ultimate peaceful mission that you're trying to achieve. So I was just wondering, um, what was the ultimate goal in choosing that name? Like, was it trying to draw attention, or was it just the connection you were saying to like a previous campaign that kind of backfired? Why War Toys?
It is meant to be a little confrontational, but not overly so. It's more just the civil acknowledgement that war toys exist, war exists. Why are we pretending otherwise? Why is it controversial for an organization to be called War Toys, but for War Toys to be sold every day around the world and that to be okay? And so it's just sort of pointing out some of the hypocrisy of it all, and having a bit of fun and being a little confrontational, and also memorable because we know that once people hear it, they're like, what? What is that? And the confusion and all that works in our favor sometimes. But there are plenty of organizations that hear the name and won't answer an email. So blessing and a curse, really.
So as you were saying before, the creation of the nonprofit is quite intertwined with your research as a Fulbright specialist in China and Hong Kong. Can you talk to us about what you were researching while you were on your grant and how that contributed to your subsequent work?
Sure. So I was very fortunate to connect with Remy Leclerc at Poly Design Hong Kong and their toy design division, or department, I should say. Um, and he has done some previous work around children in conflict and toys in conflict. And we got really excited to develop something together and built a program with his students where we invited them to try to create toys for children in war zones or refugee camps or those types of settings. And it was a fantastic exercise. And what the students made, some were just remarkable, I think have real progress. But the underlying motivation of this all was doing war toys and traveling to all these places. I have become an unintentional expert on what toys are actually like in these places, what toys sell, what toys are available, what's in the market. And in all that, From Beirut to Baltimore to Gaza to you name it, I can find the exact same toys, same mold, same packaging, same everything. And seeing that more and more and more, it dawned on me there's a handful of factories, relatively speaking, making these toys for the entire global market, which means there's a single source. And if you just go to that source, you can find them, which is a feat, believe me. You can go to that source and say, we want to invest and just help you make better toys. We're going to give you better designs. We'll give you the tools, the production molds, whatever you need. Just go sell them. You want to sell these products anyway? You already are. Everyone wins. And so I've spent now since 2017, all these years trying to unravel how to actually do that. It seems such a simple concept. Um, but it's taken several trips to China and lots of research and lots of false starts and a solid 5 years of development on our first products. But what we're doing is fostering small changes to already popular toy lines. And as proof of concept, have started with plastic soldiers. If you want me to stop there, I can. I keep blathering on, but
No, I think that's really interesting. And I would love for you to dive into that as well. But let's try to take a step back and then we'll get back to it because
sure.
I understand that before you were actually working to change, the toy designs to make them a little bit, healthier, or maybe that's a good word, maybe not. But I understand that before doing that, you were recreating accounts of war, children's accounts of war, right? And I think you've been to the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, Ukraine, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, so many different places. And you've said before, and I quote, "This work has been the most challenging of my career, but I couldn't be prouder of the impact it's had so far." And that kind of got me wondering, what was the impact of that work? So you're recreating, children's accounts of the war. I understand maybe through drawings or through toys, you can expand on that. But does it have a healing effect on children? Is it therapeutic? What exactly was that work and how does it affect the children who are working with you?
So the direct impact on the children that we work with is not huge, to be honest. We, again, go in with an art therapist and we'll have these sessions. And we're careful to point out that even though they are structured like art therapy sessions, we're not providing art therapy per se. Therapy happens over multiple sessions. It's never meant to be shared. And our intention is very much to share these things. And so it's therapy light. Um, but even that 90-minute session, from before and after the children, it's remarkable to see the changes. And it's remarkable that they can, in these sessions, share just unimaginable horrors. And by the end of it, because of the skill of the therapist, can be waving and smiling and just be a totally different kid. And so that is the most direct impact to the actual children we get to work with. And I wish it was more. And the toy program is in part a reaction to that, of we wishing we could do more direct. Where we've had the most effects is in the advocacy campaigns and media outreach. We've reached audiences that would just never think about this stuff. There's a exhibition tour in the U.S. right now until 2028. And prior to that, there was another one on Israel-Palestine that toured for 5 years in the U.S. And it purposely goes to smaller venues, so not the big cities, the places that, again, maybe wouldn't be thinking about this type of stuff more, wouldn't think about war. And it humanizes it in a way that cuts through so much racism, xenophobia, all the barriers that we all do to think that those are the others and somehow deserving of their fate. Um, and so that really is what I'm most proud of, is reaching those folks who, again, just are so closed off, but they see this thing, go, oh, it's a toy, oh, it's a tough fire, and things are blowing up, but that's funny. And then they look a little more, and a little more, and a little more, and next you know, they're crying. And that is an odd mark of success for this project, is making people cry, who wouldn't necessarily engage with that. And even humanitarian workers find out that the staff of the NGOs that we work with, there's no way for them to safely ask these kids what they've seen, to talk about this stuff. And so for the first time, often they're seeing what the children they're caring for have been through. And it is devastating to them in a good way, as odd as that sounds. But figuring out ways to share these stories, figuring out ways to build more communication is the point of this, to erode just all the stuff that keeps us separated and to get rid of the biases. These are toys, at least in the West, most folks know and will connect to and can empathize in a way they couldn't by looking at a horrible photo, as messed up as that is.
So these are the exhibitions are from drawings or recreations with toys or a mix of both, or what tools do you use to get them to share their accounts?
It's both. So the exhibitions are usually the drawing and photograph next to each other, and some of the toy artifacts that were purchased in the field maybe shown together.
So moving on a little bit more to the, I think, personal aspect of the work that you do, I can't help but think about, the profound effects that working with children who have gone through the worst possible experiences must have on you, right? And other people working with them. So how do you process all of, the trauma that you kind of get to face in a way that allows you to protect your mental health as well, and to continue to work on this field and kind of, raise awareness?
Right. So yeah, no, guarding my own mental health is a challenge for sure. It has become completely normal for myself and the main therapist I worked with. After the first day of child interviews, where we're on a new trip, it's normal to utterly break down the first day. Afterwards, we get back to where we're going. You've absorbed all of these incredibly painful stories, and you just have to yeah, break apart for a little bit. But that almost inoculates you for the rest of the trip. And it just makes it so you're kind of okay and you can acknowledge it and get past it. And then when you get home, I have a great therapist that I work with. You just have to. And after 5 wars, I have perhaps hit my limit. I've slowed down quite a bit because it is a lot. And even though you think, yeah, I'm doing okay, I'm great, it's a cumulative effect for sure.
I think one of the things, that you mentioned is you're trying to raise awareness for, the regular people about how it must feel to experience war and all of this, horrible situations. I was just thinking, how do you think regular people can best support these children, right, who are going through or who have been through war experiences? What is something that, people can do that, on their daily lives, or what would you like them to come out of the experience with, apart from the knowledge, okay, this is happening, this is really sad, but like, what can we do to contribute, right? If we're so far away from the war zone, for instance.
Right. I wish there was some easy direct action like, oh, if you can just do this or oh, get with this person or whatever it is. And I don't know if there necessarily is that one thing. Instead, I just want more empathy. I want as much as possible to break down the barriers between folks, to people, have people understand that when they see these events happening, it's no different than happening to them. It is the same, and they should understand and should be outraged and should talk to their representatives and their neighbors and their community and the folks that are enabling all these things. And again, I wish there was some like, oh, if you just boycott this person or oh, do this. And I don't know what that is, but I think it's going to take a cumulative shift from all of us of just we all decide this is enough and it's not okay. And these folks are the exact same as us. So why are we? Yeah, what's the problem?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a challenge, but as you say, it starts with, acknowledging the problem and talking about it, right? And raising awareness about it. Um, so I wanted to ask you on a different note, right? Because you're kind of a toy industry expert as well. Um, what do you think people should have in mind when toy shopping? So, do you have any advice for families out there on what they should focus on when they're trying to select the best the best toys for the kids they love? I mean, especially, I was thinking about this, because I have a nephew who loves playing with a plastic sword, currently. As much of his parents, have really worked hard to steer away from these types of toys, somehow they end up making their way into the household one way or another, right? Maybe as a gift from somebody else who doesn't share that same concern, or maybe from a school trip or whatever. So, can you offer some advice on parents and families and how they can approach toy shopping in a healthy way? Is the solution to really steer away from toys that can kind of inspire violent behavior, or not so much? Or have you gotten to any realizations about that?
I have. It tends to get me in trouble a little bit because I, unlike a lot of folks in the toy industry, don't have issue with war play or don't have issue with swords and plastic guns and that type of thing if they're in the right context. And that's all of play. Any toy can be fine. Any play is not taboo so long as you can shape it and help the child have some lessons out of that. Every kid is going to want to play with a toy gun. Every kid's going to want to, smack something with a sword or a stick or whatever it is. And I don't think the answer is to shame that. I think the answer is to say, yeah, that's okay, but let's frame that play. Let's put that into something that makes sense, that, there's a lesson to be learned about conflict and resolving conflict. But we all have these aggressions. We all have these behaviors. And it's goofy not to acknowledge it. And as far as kind of what toy to get or not get, it's whatever the child wants, really. Because in their imagination, the most benign thing will become violent and the most violent thing will become a baby. It just, you can't shape play in that way. Um, I found, and sort of our philosophy to the toys that we're making is you can just sort of move the needle a little bit. You can steer, some play with just some subtle influences, but the child will absorb whatever's around them and mirror it through their play, whether that's war, whether that's domestic abuse, whether that's, utopia. It doesn't matter. That all comes out through the play. And I think it's important to let them do that. Um, we get a lot of feedback or a lot of folks saying, "Oh, you really is so good. You're getting rid of war play or war toys and war zones. These kids don't need to be playing with war." It's actually the opposite. From a therapeutic point of view, it is incredibly empowering for these kids to be playing war. It is them taking control of their everyday reality. It is them making sense of the world that they're in. And so to forbid that is just goofy. But instead, if you can steer that play, again, make it so that it is about resolving conflict and not just killing the enemy and taking revenge or whatever it is. So, yeah, again, the short answer is shaping play, less about the toys.
I see. So I guess that's gonna be a relief for a lot of people out there. I hear that you're launching a cooperative board game as well, right? I think you've briefly mentioned this before, but it's a board game that includes frontline rescuers, combat photojournalists, and aid workers as some of the main players. And I understand the aim behind it is teaching children about, these people's work. And I think the inspiration came, from the very, very popular toy soldier that, every child has seen one, I suppose. It's set to be released in 41 languages, I believe. So can you dive into that project a little bit more?
Yeah. So for the toy program that War Toys has developed, again, this idea of shaping play patterns on an international scale by simply partnering with factories, giving them better designs, and letting them keep it. And we've started with plastic army men, as you mentioned, just because they're still sold absolutely everywhere on the planet. I have not found anywhere that doesn't, you can't go find a plastic army man. And so we said, you know what, let's just add, started with something seemingly simple, like let's add a photojournalist. And it's ballooned over years into, well, okay, now 8 photojournalists. And now, well, maybe we'll do a board game because people won't have any idea what photojournalists do. And then in that process, it became then rescuers and aid workers and grew and grew and grew. And so the idea is adding just a couple non-combatants to your standard bag of army men, even just 3, photojournalist, aid worker, and rescuer, and then putting this board game in. And the board game is designed such that it replaces, like, all these army men sets come with these really kind of odd cellophane, thin plastic maps and replace surfaces. And so we just decided to replace those maps with our game board with a QR code that links to a supporting app. And then releasing it, as you mentioned, in 41 languages, making it playable by 1.768 billion children around the world, in theory. But the idea, again, is just we're targeting kids who are already buying board toys or being given board toys anyway. We're shaping their play. We're steering them into more peaceful ideals. We're introducing ideas of press freedom and racial equality and gender equality, all by just adding a couple figures to these sets that are already popular, already selling everywhere, already distributed everywhere. So everyone wins again. The manufacturer makes their money. We spent very, very, very little money to develop these toys and to get them into these bags that will hopefully perpetuate for generations. Because when's the last time you saw a new design for Army Man? They're all the same stuff that's been selling for probably 50 years at this point. And so by just making it essentially open source, by giving it to the industry and just saying, look, go sell it. And the conversations now with the manufacturers and distributors and wholesalers and all those folks to convince them to work with us is we're going to help you make more money. We're going to help your products be better. We're going to help you market them more. So again, everyone wins. And these are the cheapest they can possibly be, the toys. That again is the goal to make them as accessible as they can be, both in languages and in economics. And that's the thing that the big toy companies can't do. And this is where I get a little grumpy about, you know, looking at any company and saying, oh gosh, they're doing such great nonprofit things and philanthropy, that sort of thing. And the research that they do is amazing and wonderful. But giving away 10,000 toys or even 100,000 toys, it's just a Band-Aid. It's a drop in the bucket. And it's going to take a systematic change on the lowest level of the industry to help kids who can only afford those toys. Because kids in the West, kids who have money, can go get the Barbie who's empowering, can go get the more military themed kind of stuff. They have choices where disadvantaged kids don't. They have very, very limited choices that they can afford, and they're not great. Another thing we're looking at, and I'll shut up after this, I'm so sorry I can blather on, dollhouse families. Plastic dollhouses, there's a couple that I've seen everywhere, and I'm sure you have them in Brazil. I know they're in the US, they're in Europe, they're in the Middle East. Same sets. They all have the same very white, very Western-looking family. We can fix that. We can fix that where no one else will, just by going, we're going to go invest in new designs. They're super cheap to manufacture. Here's all the paint masks. Here's the skin tones you need. Here's all the sculpts, and just let them have it. And then all those kids get better toys. All those buyers get things that sell better. So where's the problem? Why not do this? And that's what we're doing.
So where would you say you're at now with this idea? How far have you gotten with this, set of, great ideas to revolutionize, the toy industry? Like how far have you gotten?
We are at the proof of concept. We are, after 5 years, about to finally release our first product, and that's the Army Men and the Gay. So it has taken enormous convincing of the manufacturers and distributors, only because they all think we're trying to take advantage of them in some way. It's like, what do you mean you're not making money? What? Nah. And it just spooked them. And so finally, I'm just going to fess up here to all you people. What we finally did, or what finally won them over, was convincing them that, okay, we take on NGOs like clients and they pay us. That's not true. And I hope it's true eventually. But right now, no, we are just doing the thing, giving away. But once they thought, oh, you're making money from this, then okay, yeah, we can understand this. It's just a tough sell. It seemed too good to be true. Anyway, we have a distributor, we have a manufacturer. The toys are in production right now, finally. And I think they'll start showing up on shelves by January, by the time this is released. So
Well done. Congratulations. I guess you must be very happy to come and see that to fruition. So I was wondering who else is working with you at War Toys? So what are some of the expertise that you've joined forces with, right? Because I understand you have a lot of knowledge about, the toy sector, but what are the other partners that you've partnered with in order to achieve the mission that you're looking at?
I have been very, very fortunate to have a remarkable board of directors and advisors from the beginning. Um, Currently on the board, you've got folks like Jake Sones, who did our app. He was former head of design for Warner Bros. Games and donated all of his time to building our mobile app, which is amazing. Him and Chris Schillinger, a friend of his, to the programming. Brenda Jimenez did our lesson plans. She was born and raised in Tijuana and now lives in Finland and teaches at a art college there. Uh, oh God, I'm struggling. On our advisory board, got folks like Brown Johnson, who was senior executive at Sesame Workshop for a number of years, and before that, Nickelodeon. Um, One of the biggest people, or one of the biggest influences early on, is Dr. Judy Rubin. Um, she was original cast member on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and was the art lady. And for those of you outside the U.S., it's a children's television programming for kids that is beloved. But she was a pioneer in art therapy. And I credit her with connecting with all the folks I did, all the experts, and developing the methodology behind this in a way that is safe and ethical. So let's see, Ashley Powell was also on our advisory board. She's a toy industry person from Super 7. I can go on and on and on, but the point is, lots of really great people who from really diverse fields, coming from the toy industry and coming from, expressive therapies and coming from children's entertainment. Uh, but I've been very, very fortunate to work with these folks.
So now out of curiosity, Brian, where did you grow up and what did you grow up playing with?
Mm. So I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, and I played with kind of all the typical stuff of Gen X. So Star Wars, Transformers, G.I. Joe, those sorts of things. But also was just nuts for the generic toys, like the types of things that we're making now. Didn't have a whole lot of money all the time, and so would do the discount stores and the cheap plastic stuff, but just loved it all and loved that it didn't have an imposed play pattern already. It wasn't, oh, it's that GI Joe who does this, or oh, it's that Star Wars guy that's who they are. I got to invent my own narratives, and it's one of the things I really loved.
Interesting. So I guess it's always interesting to know also how, people grew up because that also shapes, kind of what they look at in terms of their careers and professions. Um, Another curiosity, changing a little bit the subject, but I found this to be quite curious and I wanted to ask you about that. Going back to your art photography project, I understand that it's gotten quite a wide audience. It's been on television, it's been on exhibitions. And I've also read that one of your photographers has been wrongfully used for, propaganda by ISIS. I've just wanted to hear from you. How did that play out, and how do you ensure that your work is not being misrepresented, or how do you make sure that you kind of know where people are what people are doing with it from that experience that I understand must have been pretty shocking for you.
It was definitely surprising for sure. So it came about, or I discovered it rather, because there's this image tracking service called Pixie, and market themselves to photographers as a way to kind of go after the folks ripping off your work and then go, collect the fees you're owed. And I had uploaded War Toys work into this search thing, and it scours the internet looking for whatever. And it found this thing. And it was like, oh, that's interesting. It's a heavily photoshopped version of one of my photos. And I thought it was some news or some magazine or something in the Middle East that ripped it off. I sent it to my friend in Beirut. I go, well, who is this, and who do I got to go yell at? She goes, yeah, that's ISIS. That's not, no, you probably shouldn't go yell at them. And so someone from ISIS at some point found this photo from Gaza of a little Cinderella doll and missiles falling on it. It was from a girl in Gaza City. But took this photo, photoshopped out Cinderella, put in the Quran and sort of this magical shield protecting it from the missiles falling on it. And then added a bunch of copy. I don't quite remember what it said, but it was something like, against the Crusaders, we shall prevail, that sort of thing. And I didn't really know what to do about that and just kind of sat on it for a bit. But the image tracking folks blogged about it. And next thing I knew, it just went everywhere. Every media folk wanted to do a thing about it and talk about it. Okay, fine. And I thought, we'll make some hay out of this and promote war toys. And that's more or less what I did. But the end result of it is really thinking so carefully about how the work can be used and misused. And so we at War Toys have a core policy we developed to the bottom of every page where we very specifically say, look, we're impartial to all children. We will value anything any child says, period. Where we will make editorial decisions is in presenting that work and how we present it and understanding that it can be misconstrued or misused. Just because if you're on one side of the conflict and you see something that supports your narrative, even if it's from a child, you're going to promote that and say, see, look, I told you, that's who they are. And so we're trying to avoid that as much as we can, because we know it can be misconstrued. And especially in this climate now, everything gets twisted. And so, yeah, we have to be careful about that.
When it comes to the war toys, are you looking for any collaborations or any type of support? How can people who are listening and thought the work is interesting and want to support it, how can they do that?
Well, easy, go to wartoys.org is the low-hanging fruit there. But we're always in need of funding. We're always in need of support. For the domestic program specifically, I'm going to be looking for art therapists who are interested in this type of work, willing to go out into the field, as it were, here, but work in some challenging situations and areas. And yeah, so partners in that would be great.
Okay, so I guess people can go to your website to find out the information, the contact information, or they can also reach you on Fulbrighter because I know that you have an account there. Um, what would you say now to people who are considering applying for a Fulbright grants?
I would say get it done. I'd say yes. I'd say it's very worth the time and effort. I have been so happy that I found it and participated in it and have loved being part of this network after the fact. I think it's just as valuable as the Fulbright program itself.
Amazing. That's usually the advice that people say, just do it. um, we're coming to the end of our interview, Brian. Thank you so much for your time and for explaining, walking us through your project. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we go?
Not that I'm thinking of. I'm just grateful to be here.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I wish you the very best with all of the projects and especially the efforts to support children in war zone and foster peace instead of war. To everyone who's been listening, thank you very much, and I will see you next time.